Three sinister and spine-chilling tales of haunted abandoned buildings revealed, Volume 2. In the quiet town of Oak Ridge, shadows lingered longer than they should. The whispers of the wind carried tales of three notorious abandoned buildings, each one a magnet for lost souls and chilling secrets. The crumbling school, where echoes of children's laughter twisted into sorrowful cries. The haunted hospital, where shadows flinched, fearful of the light. And that once happy family home, now nothing but a hollow shell, swallowed by silence. Local legends wove these narratives into late-night conversations at the diner, where diners would lean in, eyes wide with fear, as they shared frightful histories. On a particularly eerie October night, Sarah, a weary single mother juggling night shifts at the diner and early mornings with her son Jake, tossed out the trash and overheard a table packed with regulars by the window. One patron recounted how the old school had once sealed away 3 children in a forgotten basement. They'd vanished, their absence made flesh with the paint peeling from the walls. The next patron spoke of the hospital, where a lone doctor had never left his posts, roaming the hallways searching for patients who never came. And then the last tense pause before they shuddered, recalling the family home, where windows blinked like eyes witnessing fears that made kids weep in their dreams. Upon entering her empty house, still weighed down by the diner's dull meet-and-greet chaos, a chill settled over Sarah. She frowned, finding Jake hunched over in the dim light, captivated by a book on urban legends. His small fingers turned pages, each line sparking excitement in his wide, innocent eyes. "Mom, listen," he urged, spilling tales about hidden rooms and the need to save the people stuck inside these crumbling walls. It left a gnawing worry scuttling across Sarah's chest. Later that night, the house breathed differently. The chairs felt out of place, a clinking sound not quite right in her kitchen. Whispers danced along the edges of her consciousness, vanishing like ghosts whenever she turned her head. Panic rose within her, but she pushed it down. Fatigue often masqueraded as fear. It hadn't been the first time her senses betrayed her, but Jake's late-night heart-to-hearts kept getting more unsettling. Each story spun darker, painting his friendly doctor as someone who needed saving from dark intentions. Before we continue, I need to tell you something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to their system, and many people are missing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and select all notifications so you don't miss future videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps me with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. Little did they know, Mr. Grayson, the town's librarian, had been weaving a spell of his own every time he approached her at the diner, his smile hiding something sharp behind it. Keeping her son safe felt like her only duty as he pulled her deeper into the webs of shadows and rumors, giving life to the whispers that threatened their fragile peace. As Sarah began her own investigation into the past, dark stories unfolded about vanishing children and masked figures lurking in the corners of memory. One October evening, Sarah's resolve cracked. She took Jake on a reckless venture to the old family home, believing facing these haunting tales could shatter the grip they held on him. As they stepped inside, peeling wallpaper clung like cobwebs, and the air buzzed with muted voices, as if the memories themselves were trapped within those walls. Then the wind howled, doors groaning in protest as the entrance slammed shut behind them. The cold seeps through her bones, painting ice down her spine as the world around them darkened. And then came the sound, the unmistakable spine-chilling echo of footsteps shuffling above, never pausing as Sarah's heart raced, panic flooding every instinct. What waited for them in the shadows? With a deep breath, Sarah gripped Jake's hand tighter. Her mind raced as they stood in that cursed entryway. She could feel the heavy air pressing down on them, muffled cries, distant laughter, echoes of a past long married. The house felt alive, breathing with secrets. "Mom, we should go," Jake whispered, his voice trembling. She noticed his small frame trembling slightly, the usual bright sparkle in his eyes dimming under the weight of fear. Before she could respond, the footsteps echoed again, louder now, stumbling and uneven. They were no longer an abstract sound, but a chilling promise of something malevolent lurking just above. She counted each beat of her own heart, feeling the thud tighten her throat. "Stay close," she whispered back, forcing her own voice to stay steady. As they cautiously made their way deeper into the house, the once familiar living room now felt strange and cold. Shadows danced across the walls as if taunting them with movements they couldn't quite perceive. The fireplace, long cold, held blackened remnants of memories that had burned away, memories that might have still lived if their owners hadn't vanished. Suddenly, Jake pointed to the staircase at the far end of the hall. "Mom, look, the lights flicker," shadows flickering rapidly above them. As Sarah tried to calm her racing heart, she peered up the stairwell. Just flickering bulbs, she reassured, though her voice wavered, but the fear in her gut told her otherwise. Then the house groaned, and from above came a rush of wind that howled through the cracked windows. An old photograph fell off the wall, shattering the fragile calm. Glass exploded, scattering across the floor like a confessional of forgotten sins.
"We should really go," Jake begged, stepping backward as though the dark of the staircase had grown teeth. Sarah's instinct urged her toward the door, but a crushing curiosity held her in place. She turned to Jake, seeing his wide-eyed terror mirrored in her own reflection. "In and out," she murmured, "a quick look upstairs." Collecting herself, ashamed of her own wavering courage, she pulled him along as they ascended the staircase. Each step creaked ominously beneath their weight. The air grew thicker, grating against their lungs. Halfway up she froze, her heart pounding like a hammer against a steel door. A faint giggle danced down the hall from the children's room at the end. Was it the wind? Some echo of what had once been? She couldn't breathe. "Did you hear that?" she asked, panic creeping in. Jake nodded, his tiny fists clenched. The giggle came again, chilling her to the bone. "Please, let's go back, Mom." But instead she pressed on, driven by a terrifying need to expose whatever had snatched away that childhood joy. They reached the room, door ajar, swinging slightly with a possessive rustle. The floor was littered with dust, decades-old clutter forming small mountains in the corners. A toy lay abandoned in the center, worn and stained, a doll whose eyes glimmered like embers. Suddenly, Jake's breath caught in his throat as he pointed to the closet door. It was slightly ajar, shadows swirling thickly around it, seeming almost to pulsate. "Mom," he whispered, caught in an awful grip of uncertainty. Just then, a distant roar surged through the room. The lights above flickered violently, plunging them into darkness. The whispers grew louder, a cacophony of forgotten voices echoing through the house. Something shifted in the closet, a silhouette pulling away from the shadows. "Get out," Sarah screamed, dragging Jake toward the door, but it slammed shut behind them with unearthly force. They were trapped. What were those forgotten souls trying to tell them? As the whispers clawed at sanity, she felt an icy dread flood her veins. Would they be adding to the very fabric of the house's haunted history? And just as fear locked their breathing, the closet door creaked open. A slow, sickly creak echoed through the room as the closet door cracked open wider. A hollow emptiness yawned out at them, darkness curling like smoke. Sarah felt her heart plummet. She squeezed Jake's hand tighter, feeling his pulse race against her palm. Whatever it was real. Then, just within the threshold of that shadowy maw, an eye, glassy and unblinking, stared back at them. The breath caught in Sarah's throat, turning into a terrified whisper. "We shouldn't be here." "Mom, please," Jake whimpered, tugging at her arm, panic evident on his tiny face. But she couldn't tear her gaze away from the abyss, where the eye seemed to grow wider, pulling her in with an insatiable hunger. Suddenly, the whispers around them crescendoed into a piercing wail that rattled the very walls of the room. Shadows shifted and morphed, coalescing into shapes that lurked just out of view, their movements frantic, desperate. Something cold brushed against Sarah's back. She turned slightly, and there it was, a misty figure, ancient and writhing, its mouth moving as if trying to form words. But only a murmuring chant escaped, rising up and washing over her like ice water. "Mom, we need to go!" Jake was tugging harder now, dragging her toward the door, but it seemed anchored in place by a force they couldn't comprehend. "Come closer." The voice from the closet was low and warped, a beckoning that sliced through the chaos like a knife. "Don't listen," Sarah began, but the words caught in her throat. As her instinct screamed to flee, something deeper within her, a voice perhaps long buried, urged her to step forward. What did it want? What secrets could it reveal? With a sudden burst of strength, the closet door slammed shut, plunging the room into an even thicker darkness. Heart racing, Sarah shook her head violently, trying to dispel the fog of curiosity. They had to get out. "Mom, look!" Jake cried, pointing to the corner of the room.
There was a crack of light, a tiny sliver seeping through the cracks around a hidden door that Sarah had somehow missed. It snapped her back to reality. "Jake, come on!" She yanked at the doorknob, twisting it with frantic urgency. Suddenly, the door swung open just enough to spill dusty air, revealing a narrow staircase spiraling downward into the dark, like the gullet of some unholy beast. "Is it safe?" Jake's voice trembled. "No," Sarah whispered, but there was no choice. They heard footsteps again, slow and deliberate, echoing through the halls above. Something was coming closer. The weight of the air around them thickened, pushing her down, squeezing the breath from her lungs. "Let's go!" With one final glance over her shoulder, Sarah plunged into the darkness, pulling Jake along behind her. The moment they stepped down, the door slammed shut above them. They descended into shadows, each step dragging them deeper into the house's history, like they were moving into another realm. The whispers resumed, but this time they felt different, more desperate, more urgent, mingled with soft sobs that sent shivers down her spine. Tensions coiled tightly as they reached the bottom. It opened into a small, damp room lined with photographs, old sepia tones capturing moments of laughter, families smiling with eyes that now seem hollow. A chill crept through Sarah's bones, the very walls exuded sorrow. As she turned, a figure loomed in the far corner, hidden in shadow, drawing closer. Her heart raced. The murmurings grew louder, swirling around her, drowning out her thoughts. "Help us!" The figure stepped into the light.
It wasn't monstrous, but someone eerily familiar. A woman with eyes that held depths of sadness, a face mirroring her own. "Mom," Jake gasped. Sarah's breath caught again, the word lodged in her throat. Was she witnessing the remnants of herself? The woman's mouth opened, lips moving in silent screams that never reached their ears. All the while the room darkened, the whispers morphing into frightening pleas. "Mom, we need to go, now!" Jake yanked her, his grip in hers pulling harder than she thought possible. Before she could answer, the ground beneath them trembled violently. As the shadows closed in, a horrifying reality dawned. This wasn't just a haunted house. It was a prison. Just as the darkness began to consume them, Sarah felt a strange pull toward that hidden corner again. What was it trying to tell her? The intensity grew. What choice would they make next? Would they run deeper into the abyss, or confront the truth caught in the web of their shared blood? The moment extended into an eternity. The whispering crowd grew deafening, pressing in from every side. Shadows stretched longer, merging into a singular darkness that threatened to extinguish all light and hope. The woman, or whatever she was, reached out with a frail, trembling hand. "Help us!" Her voice, soft as a feather, tugged at Sarah's heart like a ghostly chain. "Mom, we have to run!" Jake's voice pierced through the fog, but it was almost drowned by the cries, sweet and sorrowful, echoing with despair. Sarah hesitated, caught in an emotional storm, fury battling fear. In a sudden rush, the memories flooded back, her own childhood lost in the attic of this very house, forgotten stories pulling her closer to the trapped soul. With a breath, she began to step forward, intrigued by the longing in that familiar gaze. But Jake was having none of it. He pulled at her arm, his voice a crescendo of panic as the room vibrated with energy. "Mom, please, don't listen. It's a trap." Suddenly, the shadows twisted, and a loud crack echoed through the chamber. The ground beneath them shook violently, sending pictures crashing to the floor, glass shattering like whispered promises. The grasp of urgency ignited within Sarah. She turned sharply, gripping Jake with a fierce urgency. "We have to go!" Just as they raced toward the stairs, the woman's hand shot forward, fingers curling around Sarah's wrist. Her grip felt icy, yet urgent. It was as if she was trying to pull Sarah back. "You don't understand," the woman wailed, her voice like the rustling of dry leaves. "You have to listen. You're part of it." "Leave her," Jake screamed, tears streaming down his terrified face. "Mom, please." Sarah felt the tug of her bloodline, ice racing through her veins as she fought against the woman's grasp. Every instinct screamed to break away, but the words bound her. A strange connection was forming, a thread linking generations of pain, anger, and unfulfilled wishes that spiraled into darkness. A low rumble echoed in the room as the shadows writhed, revealing fleeting glimpses of lost souls trapped between time and regret. Faces twisted in anguish flashed before her eyes, pleading silently. "Help us! Free us! No!" Sarah shouted, ripping her arm free. The darkness shuddered, and the echoes recoiled. They spun towards the staircase, the air thickening around them as shadows clawed at their heels. Sarah felt a bitter chill, but adrenaline surged, propelling them forward. They stumbled up the twisting stairs, pulling away from the chaos. Every creak, every whisper lashed at their hearts, warning them of the stakes. They burst out of the hidden door, back into the dimly lit hallway, slamming it behind them with a forceful bang. In the brief silence that followed, panting and wide-eyed, they glanced at each other. Relief flooded Sarah, but it was flickering. Ghostly fingers of dread still clung to her skin. "We're okay," she whispered, trying to convince herself more than him. Then they saw it, a flicker of light beneath the second door, pulsing in the darkness. Hesitantly, they approached it, heartbeats sinking in the eerie hush. A maddening fear crawled up Sarah's spine. What if the pull was not just in that room, but in this one as well? "Mom," Jake whispered, a tremor lingering in his small voice. What if it's worse? A decision loomed between them, heavy as stone. The haunting call of the house beckoned at her thoughts, promising secrets and sorrows. Every instinct told her to turn away, but curiosity gnawed at her mind. "Just one peek," she murmured, the words slipping out before she could stop them. But as they touched the handle, the whispers returned, louder and more chaotic, twisting reality. "Open it! Open it!" The door rattled under her trembling hand. The grip of the unknown held them captive, but Jake's wide eyes anchored her back to reality. "Don't!" he screamed, just as the door creaked open, a breath from the beyond slipping through. What awaited them behind that door? Would it be revelations, or more shadows waiting to entrap them for eternity? The answer loomed like an unquenchable darkness wrapping around them. The weight of dread hung in the air, heavy with anticipation. The door swung open with a slow creak, the sound slicing through the thick tension between them. A blinding light burst out, sharp and glaring, illuminating dust motes that danced like lost souls in the beam. Sarah and Jake squinted, hearts racing, bracing themselves against the unexpected intensity. "What is happening?" Jake gasped, pulling away slightly, as if the light might burn him. The air shimmered, a strange energy thrumming through the corridor. It felt alive, electric, thrumming at a frequency that went beyond what the normal world could manage.
"Stay close," Sarah whispered, her voice almost swallowed by the hum. She stepped forward, driven by an unseen force, curiosity thrumming in her veins. The light pulsed, bright, then dim, as if it was breathing and beckoning them closer. As they crossed the threshold into the new space, the world around them changed. The walls glistened, coated in what appeared to be a silvery mist, swirling like fog on a cold morning. Shadows twisted against the brightness, shifting restlessly as history echoed through the air. "Mom, I don't like this." Jake pulled on her sleeve, but the sound of his voice felt distant, drowned out by an eerie melody that floated through the air, wrapping around their minds like a bittersweet lullaby. "Just a little further," she urged, unable to shake the feeling that she was walking into a deeper secret. The melody grew stronger, drawing her forward, each note pulling at her heartstrings, as if somehow, somewhere, she belonged in this strange light. As they ventured deeper, their surroundings morphed before their eyes. The mist revealed paintings, works of art that flickered in and out of focus, capturing scenes of joy, sorrow, and shadows darting in between. One painting depicted a family, mother, father, and a child, their faces disturbingly blank, eyes devoid of life, as if they were trapped in time. A chill pierced through Sarah as she took a step back, her instincts screaming at her. "We shouldn't be here, Jake," she whispered, fear inching up her spine. Suddenly, the light flickered in response to her words, losing its warmth. The air turned frigid, wrapping itself around them like a vice. It was suffocating, and the melody darkened, twisting into a cacophony of whispers, cries of agony, longing, and despair swirling together, echoing from the very walls. "Mom!" Jake shrieked, his voice high and panicked. He tugged hard on her arm. "We need to go now." They spun around to retreat, but the way back was shrouded in darkness, the radiance fading as if it were swallowing itself whole. "No, let us out!" Jake cried. The whispers grew louder, a furious pact of voices fighting for release, clashing like stormy seas.
With frantic determination, Sarah gripped Jake's hand tightly, trying to center herself as fear clawed at her throat. We can't get lost. Stay together. Her heart raced. Had they come to a point of no return? The walls pulsed around them, and for a brief moment, she saw her own reflection in a nearby painting. It wasn't just her face looking back. It was her child self, eyes wide with wonder and horror, trapped in the same web she had walked in unaware. "Leave now," a voice hissed, filled with agony. Their eyes widened, caught in the realization that they weren't just visitors. They were entwined in the fate of this place. Shadows began to writhe free from the paintings, clawing at the air around them. Exhaling sharply, Sarah turned to Jake. "Hold on tight."
They began to run, but the shadows surged forward, bounding toward them, cold fingers of darkness reaching desperately to hold them in. Each step felt heavier, the air thick with regret, like storm clouds ready to burst. "Get to the door," Sarah urged, feeling the weight of history pressing in. The cries rallied, a chorus of hopeless desperation that surged through her, blurring reason. The exit was a glowing sliver, but the shadows closed in fast, hungry for more. Just when it seemed they would be consumed, they burst through the doorway, tumbling back into the dim hallway. The light flicked off with a finality, leaving them breathless, heart racing. "Did we make it?" Jake gasped, clutching her arm, eyes wide with disbelief. But the hallway trembled. Walls began to breathe, pulsing like a living thing, as whispers flooded back to fill the space they had escaped. And in the distance, the haunting melody resumed, weaving its seductive promises through the air. What new horrors would surface next? Would the walls reveal more hidden truths, or was this only the beginning? The whispers wrapped around them, a suffocating shroud that filled the air. Shadows slithered in the corners, shifting with each pulse of the living walls. Sarah's breath quickened, mixing with Jake's shaky gasps. They stood frozen, caught between the lingering melody and the terrifying chaos. "I can feel them. They want something," Jake whispered, eyes darting around, searching for where the shadows lurked. Sarah tried to steady her racing heart, but every instinct screamed at her to run. "Listen," she said, forcing her voice to stay steady. "We have to find a way out. We can't let them touch us." As she spoke, the walls shuddered again, the whispers rising and falling like an angry tide. Suddenly, a loud bang reverberated through the hallway, like a dying breath echoing in a funeral home. They jumped, spinning toward the source of the sound. A heavy door, half cracked open, beckoned them with a promise of escape, or perhaps doom. "Over there," Jake pointed, fear widening his eyes. "Stay close," Sarah urged, taking a trembling step toward the door. Each footfall echoed in the oppressive silence, becoming a battle cry against the terror threatening to engulf them. As they neared the door, the whispers escalated into a horrific wail, echoing around them, drowning their thoughts. "Mom, please," Jake's voice cracked under the strain. The door creaked as they pushed it open, revealing a room steeped in darkness. A single flickering light bulb swung from the ceiling, illuminating a twisted tableau of furniture that looked like it had been abandoned mid-use. A child's old doll lay on the floor, its glassy eyes reflecting a bulb's dim light, staring right at them. "Why is it watching us?" Jake whimpered, clutching Sarah's arm. The whispers grew sharper, almost stinging her ears. "It's all here. They are all here." A voice seemed to slither through the air like a serpent. Shapes formed in the corners, gradually materializing as shadows became vague figures. "Let's go back!" Jake tugged at her sleeve, but Sarah couldn't tear her gaze away from the doll. An unsettling feeling gnawed at her, a deep need to know more twisted around her thoughts. "Jake, I think we have to—" she started, but the room seemed to pulse with a life of its own. The furniture shifted as if breathing, and the walls exhaled darkness. A sudden tremor shook the ground, sweeping through the floor like an earthquake, throwing Sarah off balance. In that instant, dark forms lunged forward, their features indistinct, but the intent was clear and horrifying. "Join us," they hissed, their voices layered with rage, despair, and insatiable hunger. "Run!" Sarah shouted, grabbing Jake and darting back toward the door. But the shadows swirled around them, ripping at their heels, whispering secrets that twisted like knives in her mind. The door slammed shut as they reached it, the resonant sound closing the last path of escape. "No, no, please!" Jake screamed, tears spilling down his cheeks as he pressed his small body against the door. "Hold on," Sarah yelled, feeling the cold grasp of despair close in on them. She placed her palm against the door, her heart pounding in rhythm with the frantic whispers. "Let us out!" she begged, as if the walls might somehow listen. But in that electric silence, Jake's eyes widened, not at the door, but above them. "Mom, the ceiling!" She looked up just in time to see an array of faces, those trapped within the shadows, peering down at them with a mix of longing and malice. Their mouths opened, not in pleas, but in a deafening roar, their pain crashing over them like a tidal wave. Sarah's mind raced. What had they awakened? Just when she thought they would drown in despair,
A beam of light shot through the shadows, tearing the darkness apart. The door began to glow, vibrating as if preparing to burst open. "Now!" Sarah screamed, seizing Jake's hand, and together they hurled themselves at the door as the agonized wails became a cacophony of rage and sorrow behind them. As they burst through, the world around them shifted again. They staggered out into what looked like an empty street, a normal night painted under a moonlit sky, yet the air felt thick with an unseen weight. But even as relief washed over them, Sarah could feel something lurking just beyond the periphery. Shadows danced along the edges of her vision. "Did we escape?" Jake asked, panting heavily. "Maybe, but for how long?" she replied, unease pulling in her stomach. And then the light from within began to flicker again, calling them back like a siren song promising far more than it gave. What waited in the depths of that darkness? Would they have to return, facing whatever horror they had awakened?
They stumbled onto the street, but not a single soul was in sight. Streetlights flickered, casting long shadows that flicked and danced with a mind of their own. The air felt heavy, charged with anxiety, but nothing moved beyond the silence. Jake clutched Sarah's hand tightly, his small fingers trembling with both fear and a desperate grip on reality. What do we do now?" His voice was a thread, trembling under the weight of their shared horror. "We keep moving," Sarah replied, forcing herself to sound brave. But in her chest, dread pooled like a dark, tainted lake, deep and still. As they walked, closer to the edge of a street they barely recognized, the faintest whisper floated through the air. She paused, her skin prickling as if ice had been poured down her back. "Did you hear that?" She scanned the darkness around them, half expecting shadows to manifest again. Jake nodded, wide-eyed, but his expression shifted from fear to confusion. "It's just the wind." "Yeah, the wind," she repeated, though every instinct screamed otherwise. The air carried an unsettling resonance that mimicked voices, snatches of words just out of reach. They took a hesitant step forward. Suddenly, flames flickered into existence at the end of the street, illuminating a figure standing in the middle of the firelight. It was a woman, her face obscured by a veil that rippled like the dark water surrounding them. Her outline shimmered, teasing them with hints of familiarity. "Mom?" Jake whispered, disbelief dancing on the edges of his hope. Sarah's heart raced. "No, it can't be." The closer they approached, the more twisted and grotesque the woman became. The firelight flickered, casting shadows that stretched and distorted her figure, twisting it into forms they could scarcely comprehend. "Join us." The voice slithered through the air like smoke, wrapping around them, binding them to the spot. "You belong with us." It was the same wretched tone they had heard before, full of a sorrow that pulsed like a living thing. "Jake, we have to go, now." She tried to pull him back, but he didn't budge, his eyes glued to the apparition that bore an uncanny resemblance to the mother he desperately missed. "Mom, I'm here," Jake shouted, his voice breaking. "I knew you'd come for me." "No!" Sarah screamed, the terror crashing into her like waves pummeling a fragile shore. "Jake, it's not her!" But it was too late. The shadows surged forward, slipping from the corners and bathing the street in darkness. Tendrils of black reached for them, curling and twisting like serpents in a frenzy. The flames consumed the figure, swallowing it until all that remained was the echo of a sorrowful wail, mingling with Jake's cries. In an instant, an icy wind whipped through the street. The flames sputtered and grew dim, leaving behind only an oppressive darkness. Sarah felt the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end as the air began to shimmer with malice. "Sarah!" Jake's voice was high and panicked, barely audible over the encroaching shadows. She yanked him back against her as they took off running, adrenaline coursing through her as they sprinted away from the spectacle. But the shadows pursued, the whispers amplifying into an agonized thrumming that pulsed through the ground beneath their feet. Every echo felt like hands grappling at their ankles, dragging them back toward the horror. "Where are we going?" Jake gasped, panting heavily. "I don't know," Sarah shouted, desperation spilling from her lips. All she could think was to run, to escape whatever was hunting them in this waking nightmare. Around them, the street twisted and turned, a maze of darkened alleys that felt alive and hungry. Shadows leapt and recoiled, melding into the very fabric of the night. Just when they thought they could escape, a low growl rippled through the air, a threat imminent and gnashing with fury. "Keep running," she urged, but doubt crept in. How could they escape? Why did this feel like they were always running towards something darker? As if in response to her question, the shadows coalesced ahead, forming a figure, a man that seemed to flicker between existence and non-existence. "You are not free," he rasped, his voice like gravel scraping against bone. "This is just the beginning." They halted, positioned between the figure and a tangle of alleyways that seemed to beckon. Panic gripped Sarah, and with trembling hands she clutched Jake tighter. The words hung in the air, ominous and weighty. "Which way?" Jake begged. Fear radiated from him. The night was closing its grip. His question echoed back, drowning in uncertainty, resounding through the stillness. But again, the darkness began to stir. A glimmer of fluorescence flickered, drawing Sarah's gaze toward a narrow path beside the looming figure. "Let's go!" she shouted, decisive now. They bolted for the route, the whispers behind them mingling with a cacophony of sounds, sobs, laughter, and sharp, jagged screams. They dashed down the alley, her heart pounding in her ears as the shadows lunged behind them. Would this path lead to salvation, or to another cluster of nightmares? The alley narrowed, encroaching as if trying to swallow them whole, but she could see the light ahead, a beacon in a nightmare. "Run, Jake!" She pushed him forward, dread surging in her as the shadows flickered in pursuit. With every breath in that suffocating darkness, Sarah felt their grasp tighten. What had they awakened, and could they ever truly escape? The tension felt like a taut string ready to snap, urging them into the unknown. What awaited them at the end of the alley steeped in shadow? Would they face vengeance or salvation? As they rounded a corner, more shadows shifted, lunging again. Every instinct screamed, "Run faster!" But the choice felt agonizingly simple. What lay ahead in that light? Would it be the light of salvation, or the harbinger in more darkness?
As they erupted from the narrow alley and into a wider street, the light flickered and dimmed, casting elongated shadows that twisted around them like arms reaching out for prey. The air felt thick, as if every breath came drenched in dread. The distant glow pulsed erratically, and Sarah could barely make out what lay ahead, the silhouette of a crumbling building, stark against the hazy night sky. "Is it safe?" Jake asked, his voice barely above a whisper, eyes darting around, searching for any sign of comfort. "Better than that darkness," she replied, forcing a bravado she didn't feel. There was no choice. They just had to get inside, even if the place looked like it might collapse under the weight of its own despair. They hurried toward the building's entrance, a door hanging on rusted hinges, creaking ominously as they nudged it open. The smell that hit them was of damp earth and rot, as if the very walls inhaled and exhaled the remnants of souls lost within. "Let's stick together," Sarah murmured, stepping lightly as her eyes adjusted to the dim interior. It was a vast hall, the remnants of old chandeliers hanging precariously from the ceiling, dust motes swirling in the fractured light. For a moment, the sense of abandonment settled like a blanket of eerie peace. Then, a low rumbling echoed from deep within the structure, breaking the stillness, vibrating through the air with an unsettling hunger. "What was that?" Jake's voice quivered. "I don't know, but we can't stay here," she urged, the ground feeling like it might give way at any moment. They stepped deeper into the building, every creak of the floorboard amplifying their fears. Whispers crawled along the walls, taunting and teasing, as if mocking their desperate plight. They ducked into what appeared to be a reception area, a once grand lobby now reduced to decay. A skeletal receptionist's desk loomed ahead, covered in a thick layer of dust. On the wall hung portraits of unfamiliar faces. Their eyes seemed to follow Sarah and Jake as they moved. "Just keep moving," Sarah insisted, trying to shake off the feeling of being watched. But then she stopped, feeling the weight of Jake's hand slipping away. "Jake!" Panic shot through her system. She turned to see him staring at an old mirror, its surface cracked and stained. Webs clung to the edges, and the reflections inside twisted unnaturally. She rushed to him, the pounding of her heart echoing in her ears. "Look," he pointed, his voice trembling. "There's someone in there." "What?" Sarah leaned closer, dread pooling in her stomach. The mirror shimmered, and for a chilling heartbeat, she saw a figure. A woman shrouded in shadows, her face twisted in anguish, mouth moving but no sound emerging. The hairs on Sarah's arms stood on end. "Mom," Jake whispered again, grasping at hope even in the face of terror. "Get away from it."
Sarah yanked him back, just as the reflection suddenly darkened, the woman's gaze piercing through the glass as if she was reaching for them. The image distorted, the sorrowful expression contorting into something monstrous, and she felt the room grow colder, the shadows pulsating around them. They stumbled back, the whispers morphing into a furious wind that whipped through the hall, slamming the door they had entered behind them. Run! Sarah shouted, as the air filled with an agonized wail that seemed to reverberate from the very walls. The portrait's eyes glowed, and the shadows shifted like a living nightmare, cloaked figures emerging from the darker corners of the lobby. They bolted deeper into the building, the chorus of cries behind them intensifying, echoing their fear. Every footfall felt like an invitation for something to take them. "Where do we go?" Jake cried, terror etched on his face. "Anywhere but here." They raced into a dimly lit hallway with doors on either side, the corridor stretching seemingly endless. Each door stood ajar, whispers seeping through the cracks, as if each held its own dark secret. Suddenly, a chilling laugh resonated from behind one of the doors. A voice, rich with malice and familiarity, crawled through the air. "You won't leave me again." "Jake, we need to go." Sarah pulled him toward a door that looked slightly more intact, her heart racing as the laughter melded with distant sobs, the building alive with the sounds of spirits trapped in eternal torment. As they entered, the door slammed shut behind them, sealing their fate with a finality that sent shivers racing down Sarah's spine. Inside, the air felt heady, saturated with emotions long dried up. The walls seemed to whisper regret. "Sarah," Jake's voice was a whisper, rising above the other sounds. "What are we going to do?" The shadows in the corners of the room deepened, swirling like a storm as the temperature dropped. Something moved just beyond the threshold of their perception, something waiting. And in that moment of suffocating fear, Sarah's eyes widened. What if there's no way out? What if this night never ends? The echo of her own words sunk into her chest like nails, the realization of entrapment settling over them like a thick fog. Just as the shadows lunged, the door began to rattle, and the voices grew frantic. Was this building a prison for lost souls, or would it reveal something far more sinister? What awaited them behind these walls could shatter their reality, or consume them entirely. The room spun as the air thickened with an unsettling presence. Shadows pressed closer, slithering along the walls, whispering secrets of despair and loss. Sarah's heartbeat thundered in her ears, each pulse an echo of dread reverberating through her body. "Sarah," Jake's voice cracked, his eyes darting like a trapped animal. "What was that?" She clutched his arm, feeling the slick sweat against her skin. "I don't know."
"We need to find a way out, now." The thrumming whispers intensified, a cacophony of voices layered over one another, all dripping with sorrow and anger. "Stay with me," she urged, forcing her voice to remain steady. They instinctively moved toward the far corner of the room, swallowed by the merging shadows. As they edged toward a window, the glass seemed to ripple like the surface of a disturbed pond. Panic surged. They need light, the faint glimmer of hope and safety. "Look," Jake pointed, marking a speck of brightness in the distance. Sarah squinted through the glass. There it was, moonlight spilling into another room down the hall. "Let's go," she exclaimed, already sprinting toward the door. With every step, the floors creaked beneath her, groaning in protest. When they reached the threshold, the door swung open as if inviting them in, but the moment they crossed the threshold, darkness clawed at their backs. The moonlit room was starkly different, a sanctuary cut from the chaos, but the air was wrong, far too still. But that stillness shattered the moment they stepped inside. Like a gathering storm, the walls seemed to pulse and breathe, alive with a heavy, watchful presence. "Sarah," Jake gasped, pointing to the floor. A handprint, slick with something dark, smeared across the dusty wooden floorboards. The realization hit them like a cold blade. They weren't alone. Suddenly, the atmosphere shifted, the air electrified with a peculiar energy. A whisper, sharp and cold, slithered through the room, seeping under their skin. "Help me," it breathed, a voice of desperation that wrapped around Sarah's heart like a vice. No, she stammered, backing away. "We have to leave." But the shadows grew restless, swirling as shapes began to coalesce in the corners. Figures appeared, anguished faces twisted in silent screams, their hollow eyes boring into hers, pleading for salvation that never came. "Jake, we need to find the exit." He stumbled backward, almost tripping. "What if it's a trap? Or worse, we won't find out standing here." As they turned, the door they entered slammed shut with a deafening boom. The sound echoed as if the very building was laughing, a mocking, cruel sound. Why is this happening? Jake's despair painted his features as desperation gripped his heart. "Just keep moving," Sarah urged, trying to keep the panic at bay. They rushed toward a set of tall windows lined with peeling drapes, the moon illuminating the space, but it felt ghostly, surreal. Suddenly, something darted across their path,
a shadow without form, flitting just beyond their line of sight. "Did you see that?" Jake gasped. "It doesn't matter," she breathed, pushing forward. Yet something deep within urged her to look back, to confront whatever was following them. Against her better judgment, she turned. The faces from the walls were closer now, stretching toward her, hands inky and claw-like.
"Stay! Stay with us!" they chanted in unison, their voices like ice shards digging into her sanity. "Jake, now!" She grabbed his arm, and they bolted toward the far wall. Panic surged. Behind them, the voices grew frenzied, a collective wail of sorrow that filled the air with palpable terror. Just as they reached the far end, the floor trembled beneath them. A jagged crack split the tiles, and the whispers crescendoed into a piercing scream. "You cannot escape!" The room shook violently, sending debris cascading from the ceiling. "It's going to collapse," Jake shouted, his voice thick with fear. "Through here!" Sarah pointed to a narrow door, barely visible in the shadows, as the oppressive weight of the haunted room pressed against them. But would that door lead to freedom, or another fate worse than death? "Go! Now!" she urged, their only hope resting on the unknown as the walls closed in. As they fled through the door, the shadows lunged behind them, closing with an urgency that pulsed with hungry intent. What awaited them in this new realm was uncertain, but one thing was clear. Fear was just warming up, and the night was far from over. The narrow corridor was dark, its air thick with a suffocating dread. Shadows writhed around them, pulsating like a heartbeat, threatening to close in. The low moans of forgotten souls echoed, vibrating through the walls, filling the space with despair. "This way!" Sarah shouted, tugging Jake along, adrenaline coursing through her veins. They stumbled forward, the sensation of being watched prickling at the back of her neck. With each step, the whispers intensified, a chorus filled with sorrowful pleas. "Help us! Stay with us!" "Don't listen, Jake," Sarah urged, fighting the urge to glance back at the darkness clawing at their heels. Every instinct told her that staying put would seal their fates. "We're almost there." They tipped into another room, and the door slammed shut behind them. It was dim but oddly warm, illuminated by flickering candles that cast gentle shadows across fraying wallpaper. For a moment, the atmosphere felt soothing, almost comforting. A distant hum of a soft melody filled the air, a lullaby laced with sorrow. "Where are we?" Jake asked, confusion overshadowing his fear. "I don't know," Sarah replied cautiously. She stepped further into the room, scanning the space. Old photographs decorated the walls, capturing moments of happiness, joy etched into the smiles of the families who once lived here. Yet a thick tension hung in the air, an undeniable sense that those images were more than mere reflections of the past. Suddenly, a chilling wind whirled through, extinguishing the candles in one swoop. Darkness enveloped them once more, the melody twisted into chaos, embracing their hearts with terror. "Run!" Sarah screamed, gripping Jake's hand as they dashed back toward the door, but it wouldn't budge. "We have to get out!" Panic surged. There was no escape, just them and the impending shadows. A fleeting memory flickered in her mind, a reflection of her own childhood, the stories that tied her to these very walls. "It can't end like this," she gasped, desperate. The whispers escalated, a building storm of anguished voices merging into a singular cry, drawing closer. And then the room shifted. The walls pulsated, bending and morphing as they tore at reality around them. The shadows intertwined, revealing faces twisted with regret, lost children, a lonely doctor, a haunting mother, all woven into an ill-fated tapestry of anguish. "Mom, it's them," Jake trembled, clinging to her. This was everything she'd been avoiding. "I know, but we can't break. We have to fight back." "What do we do?" Jake's tiny voice was shaking, fear creeping into his words as the shadows loomed closer. With a surge of determination, Sarah stepped forward, calling out to the swirling phantoms. "You don't have to be trapped. We can help you." Her voice rang out, fragile yet fierce, echoing through the booming silence. "Tell us what you need."
In response, a sudden calm fell, silence replacing the chaos. The shadows paused, coalescing into something more tangible. The air felt electric, charged with a desperate need for understanding. Whispers converged, forming distinct words. "Set us free." Breath hitching, Sarah glanced to Jake. "Can we free them?" I think so," Jake stammered, his eyes wide with comprehension. "But how?" With renewed hope, Sarah dropped to the floor, grounding herself in reality, and closed her eyes. "We need to remember. We need to know who they are." She drew in a deep breath, connecting to the swirling energies around her. "Help us remember," she called, unleashing a tidal wave of emotions. Memories crashed against her, laughter, love, loss. The intertwined souls echoed her sentiments, their shadows swirling with light, revealing flickers of their past. "Let go of your pain," she cried, and felt Jake's small hands clasping hers, their bond illuminating the darkness. A light glowed from the shadows, shimmering brighter as warmth surged through the air. The whispers turned to harmonizing melodies. "Help," they sang, "and we will rise." "What's happening?" Jake questioned, feeling the shift. "Just trust me," she replied urgently. And then, with a collective breath, the light cascaded outwards, wrapping around them, as they found themselves levitating, leaving the room and the weight of shadows behind. The haunting cries transformed into joyful cheers. Ghostly figures of children and parents began to emerge, their pain lifting, relief washing over them like dawn after the darkest night. In that moment, Sarah understood. They weren't just releasing the trapped souls, they were healing their legacies. The very fabric of the house shimmered, as the spirits of the lost found peace, their happy memories pulsing like a heartbeat against the darkness.
As the warmth embraced them, a new door opened before Sarah and Jake, glowing with the promise of hope.
"Mom, we did it."
Jake's voice brimmed with excitement, innocence returning to his face. "Yes, we did." Tears streamed down Sarah's cheeks, a mixture of sorrow and joy flooding her heart. They stepped toward the light, leaving behind a haunting that would not rear its head again. What lay ahead? They didn't know. But now there was a path toward healing, not just for those they freed, but for themselves. Together, they walked forward, the night behind them fading into whispers of the past, leaving only the glimmer of new beginnings. As they stepped into the bright dawn, they had faced down darkness and emerged into a world where hope rebounded like morning light breaking the chains of night. And as the sun climbed higher, a final echo of hope lingered in the air. Shadows lay vanquished, their chains broken, and the spirit of the town breathed anew. You might feel that this was simply a story told to frighten, but true fans know the weight of those whispers linger beyond pages and screens. So listen closely. And if you want to continue enveloping yourself in stories of sorrow and triumph, subscribe immediately to the channel so you don't miss the next exclusive tales. Smash that like button now to fuel the algorithm, and it's time to flood the comment section with your reactions and theories. What do you think awaits our characters next? And don't wait even one more second. Share this video with at least 5 friends who need to know this story. Only the true fans will understand the importance of supporting the channel through these actions.